At Talk About Talk, we spend a lot of time thinking and talking about our strengths and our passions, particularly when it comes to our respective personal brands. We focus on our strengths and our passions because these are the things that we want to reinforce. But here's a question for you. What about our developmental areas, or our areas of opportunity, or, dare I say it, our weaknesses? Recently, I had the privilege of being invited to a book talk at the University of Toronto, where Professor Maja Djikic spoke about her new book called The Possible Self, A Leader's Guide to Self-Development. This is a book focused on how to overcome your weaknesses. This book talk was standing room only, and notably, a significant proportion of the audience was comprised of her faithful and loyal students from various programs at the University of Toronto Rotman School of Management. Just a few minutes into Professor Djikic's talk, I decided that I need to interview her for a Talk About Talk podcast episode. And here we are. In this episode, you're going to learn about two widely held false assumptions that many and perhaps most of us hold when it comes to our own self-improvement. You're going to learn what the research tells us and what Professor Djikic recommends we do instead of relying on these false assumptions. Here's a hint. She calls it the Wheel of Self.
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Welcome to Talk About Talk podcast episode number 157, Self-Improvement and the Possible Self with Professor Maja Djikic. In this episode, you're going to learn how to step it up in terms of your own self-improvement efforts. In case we haven't met, my name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. Please just call me Andrea, and I'm your executive communication coach. I coach executives to improve your communication skills so you can communicate with confidence and clarity, establish credibility, and ultimately achieve your career goals. Sound good? If you want to learn more, please check out my website, talkabouttalk.com. There are many, many resources for you there. There's one-on-one coaching, boot camps, online courses, information about corporate workshops, and I recognize that people learn in different ways. Are you an auditory learner? You'll also find the archive of this bi-weekly podcast. And while you're on the website, I really hope you'll sign up for my bi-weekly email newsletter. That newsletter is your chance to get free communication coaching from me every second week in your email inbox. Plus, some behind-the-scenes insights, information about the most recent podcast episodes, and upcoming programs. So, please sign up for that newsletter. Okay, let's get into this. I'm sure you want to hear from Maya. Here's how this episode is going to go. After I interview Professor Djikic, we'll get right into the interview. And then at the end, I'm going to summarize with three learnings. Of course, three learnings. Three things that I want to reinforce based on our conversation. Things that I hope you will take away with you in your own quest for self-improvement. Now, let me introduce Maya. Maya Djikic, PhD, is a personality psychologist specializing in adult development. She's an associate professor of organizational behavior and HR management, the executive director of the Self-Development Laboratory, and the academic director of the Rotman Executive Coaching Certificate Program at the University of Toronto Rotman School of Management. Her research has been featured in over 50 media outlets and in 15 countries. Thinkers 50 has selected Maya as one of the 30 thinkers around the world whose ideas have the potential to shape the future of organizations. Her first book, The Possible Self, A Leader's Guide to Personal Development, was published in March 2024 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. Now, here's Maya. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we recorded this interview in her office at the University of Toronto Rotman School of Management. Here goes. Thank you so much, Maya, for joining us here today to talk about your book, The Possible Self.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So as I was telling you, I really enjoyed your book launch talk, and I was sitting amongst many of your adoring fans, your adoring students, and it was really a moment that was very inspiring, I would say. And I immediately went home and asked if I could interview for this. So I'm really excited to be here. And I wanted to start by talking about the foundation of your book, which is really about correcting two false assumptions, as far as I understand, right? So one of them is that we are stable and static or fixed. And the second false assumption is that we can change through sheer willpower. So I thought these two assumptions would be a great place to start.
Absolutely. I think this idea that personality is stable, I think the reason why we have it is because when we're children and young people, we develop and grow and so on. And I think what happens to us then, we end up in a life, if you will, of an adult. And that life is mostly focused on holding, all the pieces of the puzzle, all the balls in the air at the same time. Perhaps you have family or you have a particular job. And oddly enough, everything in our environment is meant to protect the stability of that life. On the other hand, and so we think that we're stable. We look at the stability of our life. We don't notice that slowly we get a little bit more stagnating or that we don't feel as excited about life. But we notice that, oh, well, I've been doing this for 15. This is just who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm the kind of person who comes home and turns on TV, or I'm the kind of person who always goes out after work for a drink, and so we start having these inner dialogue about who we are. Yeah. And because this person, I think of it as a box that we are, because that's the box that everybody else expects you to be, we don't bother challenging whether or not we are this. We don't veer out because it's kind of dangerous to explore outside of the box internally. You can destabilize relationships. You can even destabilize yourself by saying, oh, wow, maybe I'm not an introvert or maybe I'm not an extrovert. So I think this is one thing, right? And unfortunately, even scientists up to, early 2000s were telling us, oh, no, you are all done by the time you are 20 or even by the time you're 7, if you ask psychoanalysts, right?
Right.
So that's one assumption that I think has been very, very destructive for us as adults and doesn't reflect how we grow, all the way, all until our very last breath.
Yeah. So I was thinking of it in the context of like Carol Dweck's fixed and growth mindset. It's a little bit related to that, but it's different also, right? Because she's talking about maybe more aptitudes, right? Or learning new skills as opposed to having an aptitude like a strength or a weakness or a propensity to act in a certain way, like, for example, based on the 5 personality types that we have, right? So
Carol Dweck is talking about our inner beliefs about whether some skill is movable or not. So is your intelligence movable? Is any skill that you have movable?
Yeah.
The skill is a little bit different than broadly who we are. Right.
Okay.
And so what we're talking is about broad ideas like, who is this person I am? And by the time you put a sentence, I am X together, you have already moved on beyond it. So any sentence that we can put together that is I am X is not correct. So we need to know that. And instead of identifying with I am X, it can be I am becoming or I am moving in this direction. Or this is who I was. In my 20s, I was an extrovert. And then in my 30s, I was an introvert. And then in the 40s, I discovered that's a much more realistic and accurate story about our lives than I am, and then put in a slot of trait.
Oh my goodness. My brain is exploding right now. I don't know if you can tell by the look in my eyes.
There's a little spark.
I'm like, wow, okay. So it is about a narrative and being open-minded, right?
Yes.
Not being fixed, to use those words.
Not thinking any story you tell about yourself is you. It's almost like, okay, I'm telling you my story. I know it's a story. I've put it together from some old pieces of evidence. And it can be a useful story because people ask you, tell me about yourself all the time. But notice how you tell a different story when somebody's interviewing you for a job and when somebody's sitting with you on a date. You wouldn't tell the same story because you implicitly understand what they're asking you is something different. So you put together, out of their question, you put together a little story of yourself and offer it to them and say, okay, do you think this is appropriate for the situation? But that's not your totality. Our story is not who we are.
So you said, I think of us as a box. Is that box constantly evolving?
We are not a box. I think most people think of themselves as a box. It's almost a box they construct in their own mind to just feel a place of safety in. Versus we're actually not. We're like a rolling ball. We're just like we're like a wheel. We're rolling along and changing and picking different things along the way. But we're not something that you can point a finger to. It's like I am always this. Right? That would be unnatural given that we are live beings that are continually growing and developing.
So when I'm coaching executives on their personal brand or their professional identity, I introduce them to a bunch of what I call them strategic principles of personal branding that are related to this exercise. And the third one is your personal brand not only can, but should evolve. And this is actually the one where people are like, well, they'll say to me, Andrea, I need some help. I think my personal brand needs to change. I'm like, okay, stop. First of all, good.
Yes,
right?
Yes. So here's an interesting thing. I think what you call personal brand, which is I'm in my kind of, and it filters in my mind, is basically stories we tell to our employees or colleagues or people in our work life about what is the value that we contribute potentially to their workplaces.
Yeah.
So that story needs to evolve, not just because we evolve, but also because the other needs of these professional spaces and workplaces evolve. So in a sense, I imagine when you're constructing a personal brand, it's always a combination of I have these skills and these abilities and this hunger for learning or whatever other things you think you have that could be useful. And this is how it fits in the things that you need.
Right.
And so that little match will always be, I imagine, changing.
Yes.
And not just because we change, but also because their needs change.
Their needs change. It also depends on the context and the people with whom you're communicating. And the world's changing. Technology's changing. Plus, we're getting older. Our families are changing, right? This is what
Everything is always changing.
Okay. So what about the second false assumption about us achieving maybe improvement or personal development through willpower?
I think, unfortunately, it is a leftover of this very old-fashioned idea that anything that's worthwhile to achieve has to hurt. So it has to hurt. It has to feel. And people say, well, they say, oh, I'm at work and I'm not enjoying it. And then it's like, well, it's work. What do you expect? That's
right.
And I think there's something about the way that we look at adult life and work that it's supposed to be pain. You're supposed to force yourself to go to it. And oddly enough, we ascribe value, like a very high value in terms of integrity. We say, oh, you're the kind of person who, even though you hate your job and you go there anyway and you make yourself and you do it and you go home and then tomorrow again you do the same thing because this is just the kind of person you are. So we tend to somehow glorify stability, like just not changing, being fixed in place, and we call it integrity. But really, integrity is something very different. So it doesn't require integrity to refuse to change.
So I've had a conversation with some people about this, and I say, be careful you're not celebrating being a martyr.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I thought you were going to say that. I was
it's
just waiting for you.
It's absolutely it. Because just because we're suffering doesn't mean that we're growing and developing in the direction of our potential. I think when it comes to martyrdom, I think some people, they look at the book and the focus that I have on understanding your wants and fulfilling them and say, well, that's very selfish North American. That's not how we live. And what people fail, what they fail to understand is that at the very core of our wants are not just individual, they're also social wants. It's a want to be together, to build something interesting together, to have relationship, all different kinds of relationships, to be in communities, to build extraordinary achievements in large groups, right? You're building in a cathedral, that's a lot of people working towards the same aim, right?
Right.
So we have very social wants. But the problem is that if you're very unclear, if you think that your wants don't count for anything, don't lead you anywhere, that they're just not so good, you're going to give your life over to other people's wants. And when you do that, they're going to tell you what you should want, when should you want it, what kind of life you should lead. And if you let yourself be led by that, what will happen to you is that people will be clapping and saying, wow, incredible, you've just given your life to X. You did not for one moment ask yourself what you want, right? But inside of you, there was a potential, that potential that was left unfulfilled is going to cry for you. Because...
Oh, wow. You're going to be quoted on that, Maya.
Because it's there waiting for you. We all have our unique set of things. It's like we're all unique pieces of puzzle, and the world needs our uniqueness. It doesn't need a slotted piece that is always the square or always a peg. It needs our unique pieces. So when we don't become these pieces, we deprive the world of what we could have done in it.
You're really speaking my language here. You're reminding me of something. I heard a quote. It was in a Tim Ferriss podcast recently. He was interviewing a successful tech entrepreneur who made this quick comment, and I rewound it and I listened to it again, and I was like, wow, he is bang on. He said something like, we're all very self-absorbed. And if you think about it, we kind of have to be, because we need to survive. We're protecting ourselves. We're thinking about ourselves. We're maybe even selfish. And he said, how ironic is it then that we really don't know ourselves?
Yeah.
Right?
That's very good, because what he's pointing out is that we're actually not self-absorbed because we don't understand. We're absorbed. How about that? We're absorbed in a cultural dynamic of whatever it is. You have to make money, you have to be this successful, you have to look like this, you have to have this body. So we're not actually self-absorbed, we're just absorbed by random movements.
Right. It's like we're reacting to stimulus as opposed to starting with ourselves.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. So at your book talk, I was the one that actually asked the question of comparing your insight about overcoming or the false assumption that we change through willpower, and comparing that to James Clear's notion of atomic habits. Can you explain to the listeners what you said about that?
A fantastic question. Even in the talk, I said it was a fantastic question. It's too bad I didn't have a bit more time to talk about it. So here's and who am I to disagree with somebody who's selling millions and millions of books? But here's something in your own experience. I'm sure most people have tried to force themselves into another way of being. And if you have a developmental wheel that is moving naturally, let's say you're introducing a new hobby and you're like, oh, I'm interested in that, then the habit route can work. Because basically it just provides a bit of a direction, a little bit of a nudge, and the whole wheel is moving. Your motivation, your emotion, everything is moving in one direction, right? But if you have all parts of the wheel pushing you the other way, and you're trying to use the willpower to push yourself into some, you want to change a food habit or you want to exercise.
That's the obvious one, isn't
right,
it?
The very obvious ones. And that is not something a habit can do.
Right.
Right, that's not the route. Why? Because something that's stopping you from it is deep. And forcing yourself means like pushing one part of the wheel one way while the rest of it is going the other way. You are basically breaking yourself. And of course, eventually you'll fail because you're breaking yourself. You'll run out of willpower.
Well, this relates to cognitive dissonance too, right? Like I am all these things, and now I'm trying to be. I'm all X, and now I'm trying to be Y.
Yes,
right.
And I'm forcing. I'm not that naturally. I'm forcing myself. It is not about not having a cookie you want. It's about not wanting a cookie. And what true transformation, self-transformation does when you move all parts of the wheel, it makes you not want the cookie. It makes you want to move your body. Not try to move your body, force yourself to move your body.
Can you illustrate an example maybe of how James Clear might attack this? So imagine you or I or whoever was seeking to lose weight or lower their blood sugar, whatever, right? For health, their doctor told them to, and they said, okay, I'm committed to.
1%. So like they would say, let's cut down your sugar level by 1 spoonful of whatever that you put in a cup of coffee. And then, so that's what you would do. It would be a little sweet, and that, after, and it would be basically incremental. But at every step, that incremental 1% step, you're fighting yourself. And even when you finish, the idea is that, when you get there, then you're going to stabilize yourself into that habit, and that you won't want that sugar anymore. But as millions of you know, you will still want it.
Right.
Right. And so you can get yourself, I completely understand this kind of incremental mindset. It's what you're doing is leaving yourself behind. You're forcing this behavior that's supposed to be good, but you're not taking the rest of the self along. And the reason for it is that the rest of the self is saying, no, 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 no. And it has its reasons. And unless you address these reasons, you will always be fighting yourself.
So this is the right time for us to introduce the wheel of self, right?
Yes.
So maybe using the same example, how would the wheel of self help someone who had the similar instructions from their doctor and desire, right, to make a change?
So, for example, you take something like you're diabetic and you need to cut down the sugar. And so the wheel of self has 5 parts. So it basically says that you're not just behavior, you're also your motivations, your emotions, your thoughts, and your history, all neural pathways. Okay, so now you know here's the behavior that you want change, but you start with motivation. And so the idea is that, okay, you want sugar. But the question is, what do you want in sugar? We don't just want sugar, we want something in it. So what is it for us? Is it a sense of comfort? Is it a sense of warmth? Is it a sense of nostalgia? Sometimes people tell me when I have a coffee, nice sweet coffee with milk, it just gives me that feeling of peace. So you see, we want something that's not as simple as I just want the sugar. We're looking for something. This is why, let's say that you don't put that sugar. So the emotion that's going to come up is going to be a little restless, a little uncomfortable. And so with the wheel, you're looking for what is that emotion. Is it anxiety? Is it sadness? Does it cause frustration? Does it cause fear? What is it? What is your emotional system signaling to you about that? And then from there, you move on to, once you find out a little bit about emotions, you know that basically what is causing them is ways of looking at the world. So it's like, I am restless because I want comfort, I want to feel good about myself, but I don't. So I put a little bit of extra sugar in my coffee, and it sweetens my day, and it makes me feel at peace about the fact that I'm not the person that my mother wanted me to be, or that I'm not the person that I thought I would become. Do you see?
Yeah, absolutely.
That little spoon of
very
sugar
visceral. It's very visceral.
is visceral.
Yeah.
And so what are we doing? We're going backward in that wheel all the way to your history, which is your past pathways, neural pathways. So you carry your history in your body. And you can go from just a construct about the world, which is that, okay, maybe I'm not succeeding as I thought I would. It can take me straight to the memory of, let's say, I don't know, not being able to do my homework and feeling very, not smart, and I feel very restless, and going and getting some Nutella and eating some Nutella because it made me feel good in the moment. Okay, so I have this moment. So this is the history. The history is that I don't feel I feel unsettled about how smart I am. I calm myself through sugar, and then that becomes a way in which I calm myself. And so all of that needs to change.
Wow.
These neural pathways that bring you calm, the neural pathway that says maybe you're not as smart as you thought you are, or maybe your teacher told you you're never going to amount to anything, or maybe somebody made fun of your body when you were 7-year-old or whatever, a kid. All of these things that you carry with you, they need to be, shall we say, reprogrammed. You need to overwrite these experiences neurally. And oddly enough, that doesn't take day by day for so many days. It can be a couple of days. But you need to know what you're doing with these techniques.
So would you recommend that if somebody wanted to make a significant change, however you define significant change, that they almost use a checklist of this wheel of self and say, how do motivations work in here? How does my history, how does emotions fit in here? And then work really hard to do the work. And then when you completed or filled in the blanks, I guess, for the elements in the circle, you have a higher likelihood of being successful.
Here's another way that you can think of it. Let's say you decide, I want to make a change. I want to start running as of tomorrow, and every morning I want to run. I say, try it. week later, I'll ask you, are you running every day? And if you tell me no, I'll send you right to the wheel.
Yeah.
Because if you're excited by it, if your emotions are positive about it, if you can't wait to get out there, well, it doesn't matter if it's rainy. You're going to find ways, and everything in you is going to be doing this. But if you say, I want this, and then you don't, it also means that you don't want it. And the job of the wheel is to find why you don't want it and remove the reason.
Okay. So this is a nice segue into this point that you made at the book launch and also in the book very, very poignantly. And I hear this from my clients sometimes too. It's the small things that people say sometimes that have such a huge impact on who we become.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, right? But you alluded to it in the example that you were just giving.
Particularly if you get this comment when you're younger or if you're destabilized, because our emotional system works that when we're destabilized emotionally, neural pathways build faster. So if you dysregulate me, if you make fun of me, and then and on top of it say something to me, that's going to stay burned, etched into my memory. So I call in the book that significant events, which is a little bit different than like very extreme trauma, but it still functions in the same way, which is that it stays there as kind of this free-floating set of sensations in you that activates every time somebody brings up the topic.
And we look for reinforcement of our self-beliefs, right? And same with others. We look for reinforcement of signals that reinforce our beliefs about others as well.
So if, let's say, you have a friend betray you in the third grade, and you have this kind of belief or lens that clamps on that says, I can't trust people again. So what do you do then? Then every new person you meet, it's like, I can't trust you, and I can't trust you. And if you want a relationship, guess what? You're not going to pick trustworthy people because they don't confirm your idea about people. You pick untrustworthy people to confirm to you that they cannot be trusted. And there we have that self-fulfilling prophecies that can lead us into trouble.
So do you have any poignant illustrative examples that maybe some of your students or maybe through interviews that you learned where in an executive context, right, where people were maybe seeking to improve their executive presence, their speaking or something?
You know what, I have a lot of examples. So I put some of them in the book. So I can kind of let me see what I can bring up. So I find inevitably when somebody comes with inability to feel comfortable in public, inevitably they don't feel comfortable in private. So it would be something like, I want a life, let's say my parents don't approve of, and therefore I feel like I can't be myself. I feel like I should really respect them, follow what they're saying. But on the other hand, I also want what I want. And so when you put me in public, you're basically putting in public this splintered version of me, which is me fighting against myself. And what I find interesting for leaders in particular is this. When you're a leader, you're asked to go out there and you kind of open the door to your heart. You just get up there and you open the door. And if you don't open the door, you will look very stiff, and non-transparent and non-authentic. So I tell leaders, so let's say that you want to be authentic. You go up there and you open the door to yourself. But what's in there is a mess, confusion, competing war, like you haven't sorted yourself out. And I said, you're not doing anybody a favor. I tell them, look inside, just try to sort yourself out, try to understand yourself, try to grow parts of yourself that are undergrown. And then open the door. So that the things that people can see become inspiring. And nobody wants perfection. We don't want to see perfection. The image I always have is, there's an ancient Japanese art, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called Art of Golden Repair, where they have these beautiful, they have a bowl, let's say a clay pot. And if they break it, the artists, they pour gold into the seams to hold this bowl back together. And the bowls are incredibly beautiful. So I see people like that. So we're all a bit broken, okay? We're all a bit of a mess. We've all had things in it. And working on yourself is like pouring gold in the seams of our brokenness.
What a beautiful metaphor. I love it.
And that's what people want to see. They don't want to see perfection because they're not perfection. And when they see you and they think you're perfect, they'll say, well, that's not who I am. I guess good for you. But when you see both your brokenness and your growth and development and the way that you put yourself together, it gives them hope.
So do you share with your students and your readers some of your own
you know what?
cracks
filled? Oh, yes.
I'm sure.
So I used to be the most terrible, terrible teacher and speaker. It would plunge me into such fear and state of existential distress that I almost cried. Like I could not even introduce myself, right? When I was in my PhD and I would start teaching, I would be in blisters.
Wow.
Like I would have
Physical
allergic reaction to.
Wow.
And it was such an extreme state that somebody could say, I could have easily said, you know what, this is just who I am. I'm the person who is very much an introvert. I don't need this. I don't want this. This is not my strength. This is not who I am. If you had shown me that video of myself at whatever, what was I, 25, and then you fast forward 15 years, okay, the 25-year-old version wouldn't believe that I could get so much joy. And that is my life's potential to teach.
Yeah.
Right? If I got stuck in that story, and if I got stuck in that pain, the best of me would have been left behind. And so this idea that we always should focus on the strengths, then to me becomes very fraught, because if you focus on your strengths, I would have given up any interaction with public, go back to research lab, and you would never hear from me again. But there is something pulling, and we need to hear the thing that is pulling us and saying, okay, work on yourself, try to sort it out, try to figure out why is it that you get to, what prevents you from being yourself right in public. So for me, and I always tell my students, I mean, if I can stand in front of you like this and talk like this, trust me, you can.
Maya, you absolutely commanded the room at your book talk. I mean, phenomenal.
I was the same person who was in blisters at 25, right?
Wow.
24, 25, from stress about being in front of others.
Oof, I love that story. There's hope for all of us.
There's hope for all of us. If there's hope for me, there's hope for all of us.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you want to add about the possible self before we move into the 3 rapid fire questions?
No, use it, it can inform you, but you can also use it to work on yourself, and only you know when you're ready. So just use it however you want, either just to read and inform yourself, to understand yourself just a little bit better and others, or to really do the deep work.
Right. So in other words, someone might pick it up, not thinking about a specific developmental need that they have, and someone else might be, there's a specific thing I want to work on, and this is going to help me figure that out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You ready for the 3 rapid fire questions? So this first question is a little bit meta given the conversation that we just had. So I can't wait to hear how you answer it. Are you, Maya, an introvert or an extrovert?
Ambivert. So both. When, depending on time, the day, the mood.
Okay, your answer surprised me. I thought you would say, I'm not allowed to say I am.
You're asking about the past. Who knows what's going to happen in the future?
Okay.
Right. So I am is the question about the past. So I have been introvert. I have been extrovert. I've been all sorts of things.
Most of us are ambiverts, right? I tell people that I ask it that way to be provocative.
Yeah.
Right. You know what the most common answer is?
What?
Is I am a high-functioning introvert. I hear that all the time. And then I'm like, I want to educate them about how introversion is not a bad thing. It's just introverts are the best listeners.
It's so funny,
right?
high-functioning as if it's a disease.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, second question. What are your communication pet peeves?
People who don't want to communicate. So who just like, I don't want to talk about it. We need to really respect when people don't want to talk about it. But as somebody who really likes talking about things, I find that difficult. It constrains the relationship in a way that I find very difficult.
Yeah. So in professional context, sometimes people, and in personal context,
both,
right? Yeah.
Both. People just don't, let's say you could have a colleague who gets upset and about something that happened and you want to fix it or you want to at least ask about it, and they're like, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or in personal, it's like, oh, I don't want to talk about this thing. And that, we need to respect. People don't have to talk to us if they don't want to, but it makes it difficult to keep going.
And given your background on kind of optimizing yourself,
yes,
I can see that must drive you crazy.
It does.
You're like, oh, you need to talk about it, even just internally, if not with others,
I know. And it also, it's like when people don't want to develop themselves. And I'm like, but your potential is calling for you. Right. I feel sad, but everybody has their, I have to leave. It's different people's paths. I have to leave it.
Yeah, we need to be respectful.
Yes.
Interesting. I've not heard that answer before. That's amazing. Okay, last question. Is there a podcast or a book other than your own that you find yourself recommending the most lately?
Yes, I always recommend this one book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Fantastic book about trauma that I think helps people understand just what it means, like that they carry their past with you, that you carry your past with you and that it's continually influencing you. And if you wanted you to influence you a different way, that you need to do something inside of the body.
So it's mixing. I haven't read the book. I've heard of it many times.
Fantastic.
But it's about like merging of trauma and physiological response and emotional response and all that. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, well, thank you for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to recommend that everybody go out and buy The Possible Self. Thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks again to Maya for so generously sharing her time and her insights with us. After I stopped recording, Maya and I continued our conversation in her office. And frankly, I wish I hadn't stopped recording. Perhaps we'll have another chance to continue the conversation. There are so many meaningful points that Maya made. In particular, I loved her metaphor of working on ourselves, on our self-improvement or personal development. She said it's like pouring gold into the seams of a broken clay pot. She spoke about the ancient Japanese art of gold repair, where they pour molten gold to fill the gold cracks. I hadn't heard of that before, but I could imagine exactly what she was talking about. I looked it up too. It's called Kintsugi, spelt Kintsugi, which literally means join with gold. What a beautiful metaphor for working on our self-development. Now, as promised, I'm going to briefly summarize 3 things that I want to reinforce with you based on our conversation. First, it's the 2 false assumptions that form the premise of this book, The Possible Self. The first one is that we are stable and static. No, we are not. As Maya said, we are constantly evolving. Personality is not static. You are not a fixed box. Rather, you're more like a ball, rolling along, collecting things, changing, constantly evolving. Another effective metaphor. The second false assumption is that we change through sheer willpower. Again, that's wrong. Instead, Maya points to the research, hers and others, which concludes that a more holistic focus on making change is what's going to work. The second learning that I want to reinforce is a framework. It's a new way to think about this holistic view, and it's called the Wheel of Self. There are 5 elements in the Wheel of Self, including your motivations, your behaviors, your emotions, your mind, and your body. If you're looking to make a change, if you're focusing on personal development and self-improvement, again, it's not just willpower. If you consider your motivations, your behaviors, your emotions, your mind, and your body, and how all these things relate to your objective, then you are much more likely to be successful in achieving your goal. The third and last point that I want to reinforce is the significance of what we might believe are the small things that people say. The small things that people say to us and the small things that we say to others. Sometimes these seemingly small things manifest in big, significant ways. It's certainly worth the effort to take care of our words directed at others and also to interpret the true motivation and meaning behind others' comments to us. So think back to when you were a child, maybe in elementary school or junior high, the comments that you heard from peers, from teachers, from family members, and how some of them stuck in your mind. They probably had far bigger consequences than you'd intended. Off the top of my head, I remember one Halloween when I was in elementary school and I wore lots of makeup for my costume. One of my teachers caught me in the hallway. She looked at me and she said, "Wow, Andrea, when you start wearing makeup, you're going to be a knockout." Wait, what? Wow. Okay, I know this sounds like a ridiculous example, but I have often thought this in my mind. I wonder if that teacher was conscious at all about what she was saying about my appearance and about what I had to do to improve it. So, whether it's a comment about appearance or intellect or skill or style, whatever it is, whether you are making or receiving the comment, consider the impact that you're making with seemingly trivial comments. Small things can have big consequences. All right, that's it. That's everything for this episode. Thanks again to Professor Maja Djikic for sharing her time and her insights with us. I strongly recommend her book, which you can find a link to in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, I really hope you'll refer it to one of your friends. And I also hope you'll leave a review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening and talk soon.